even if you say something like, oh, yeah, I hear you, I hear what you have to say, one of the things I always offer is to check your energy while you're saying this. Are you saying it from the energy of defensiveness, right? Are you saying it from the energy of frustration? Or are you saying it from the energy of entitlement? And that's not so that you can go back and like argue with yourself and beat yourself up, but like being really curious about what it is that you want to communicate and why it's important to communicate it from that way. So being clear, like, what is the energy I'm showing up with, and what do I want the theme of how we communicate in this relationship to be, and is it important for both of us to connect in that way? Hi, and welcome to the Stethoscopes to Swaddles podcast with Shira Bergbauer, episode number 89. Today on the podcast, I want to talk about a topic that I believe is very important, and I think that I want to approach it from just looking at it from a thought model, and this is how to respond to negative feedback in marriage. So I was thinking about this in terms of like what happens even in like motherhood if we get negative feedback, or at work if we get negative feedback. And I wanted to say a little backstory about my experience as like a full-time employee and my relationship with negative feedback to kind of reflect on this and then extrapolate that as far as feedback in marriage. Hey mama, you deserve a life free of overwhelm and burnout. Welcome to the Stethoscopes to Swaddles podcast. I'm your host, life and mindset coach, Shiro Bergbauer. I'm also a wife, mom, and CRNA. This is the podcast for high-achieving mamas in medicine like you and I. Together, we'll learn how to navigate the ups and downs of working motherhood. If you're looking to thrive in your relationships and overcome overwhelm in your motherhood, marriage, and medicine, you're in the right place. Welcome to the Stethoscopes to Swaddles podcast. You know, in my 10 years of working at the same institution, I have had some great years and I have had some not very great years as an employee. And one particular year, I received feedback from my boss and I was like shocked and defensive. And that entire year, I showed up with the energy of these people are wrong, I am right, I don't have anything to fix. And then a couple of years later, I received another set of feedback that was constructive, but it was some negative feedback too. I decided to take massive responsibility for what I was being told I was doing and how I was showing up. And it was very, very different. And it also helped me uncover a lot of life lessons, and it helped me uncover how I show up, how I respond to feedback. And I really, really am grateful that I learned those lessons in the workplace and that I can take those into my marriage and also help my clients navigate that through their own marriages. I was thinking about when your partner, for example, says something. It could be maybe just a complaint. It's not even a criticism, they have a complaint. How do you respond to that? So if your partner says something that you don't like, it could be maybe they are concerned about your spending of financial resources, or they can be concerned about how you're spending your time. It could even be just a simple complaint about they're concerned that you're not being fully present, that you're spending a lot of time on your phone or not interacting with them. Or it could be your partner says something like, I don't feel like I'm being heard, or I don't feel like I'm valued. And how we approach this can literally be either to move the relationship forward or as a step back in the relationship. And so what I want to do today on this episode is kind of help you see how that looks like on either side. So what I was thinking about is feedback is just neutral. It's just words that our partner says to us that are just neutral. Like it could be, husband said, I don't feel like you're valuing me. And so they're just expressing words. And you can take this to mean that you are being accused of being uncaring, you are accused of being not present or mindful, or you can just flat out be like, this person is wrong. I don't agree with what he has to say. So the first model I want to talk about is the model where you take this feedback and you have the thought that your partner is wrong and you are right. And if you are listening to this podcast for the first time, I just want to talk about the model very briefly. And this is a tool that was created by Brooke Castillo of the Life Coach School. And basically what the model is that circumstances, we have thoughts about circumstances, and these thoughts create feelings or are either uncomfortable emotions or positive emotions. You can call it comfortable emotions and negative emotions, whatever language you would like to use, but it could be just like, what is the emotional response after you have that thought? These thoughts then and feelings are the reasons why we do or don't do certain things. And at the very end, the result that we see of that circumstance or that thought is based on how we started off the thought process, right? So circumstances are always neutral. Thoughts can be positive or negative. Feelings can be positive or negative. Actions can be actions or inactions. And then you have results. So just going back to this model of feedback, imagine that your partner says something that you perceive to be negative feedback. You have this thought and you're like, he's wrong and I'm right. Now, if you think about the emotions that come from that thinking that the other person is wrong and you are right, one is it can be like disregard and defensive, where you are disregarding their thought process and being defensive. Or it could be even apathy or indifference. And what do you do when you are feeling apathy or defensive? One, you may start to argue with the person, right? You may ignore what they're saying and choose not to take in the feedback, right? You may maybe have even increased conflict with them. And you might even look for things about them that you have something to say about to throw in the pot, right? You may be like, well, you think I'm spending too much time on social media. Well, you watch too much TV. Now, I can neither confirm or deny that this is a conversation that's happened in my household, but it looks a little bit like that, like where the person's like, oh, I don't think we're spending enough time together. And you're like, well, you work too much, right? And what is the result of that? I believe if you look at this model and you show up in apathy or defensiveness, disinterest, disregard, indifference, the result that you create is actually that then you are wrong, right? And the other person is right. So it's like your model, right, started off with the thought that the other person is wrong and you're right. But because of the actions that you're showing up with, then you're wrong, right? You're not committed to furthering the relationship. You're not showing up as the best and highest version of yourself in that relationship. Another example can be maybe somebody brings up something from the past. And if you get defensive and you start maybe, defending yourself or poking holes at their story or arguing with them, the result is then that, again, you're wrong because now you are actually furthering the point of bringing the past into the present. So what I was thinking about is what happens if you decide to interrupt that model? If you decide, again, the feedback is neutral, but then you have this thought, and this is the thought I want to offer you for this podcast, which is, I don't agree, but I'm willing to learn what's behind the feedback. When you're saying to yourself, I don't agree, but my willingness to understand, why is this person expressing themselves in this way, I can step into the emotions of curiosity, which is inquiry, right? I can show up in compassion. Can I be empathetic? Can I be congenial? Can I understand their perspective without being defensive? In doing so, we can take actions that are like holding space, right? Like, oh, interesting, that's how you feel. Tell me more about like why you feel that way. Asking questions. I think one of the biggest things that we fail to do is when we receive feedback or when somebody says something to us that we don't like or we don't agree with and not ask questions, it's like we're just implying there's not more to what we're being told. So when you hold space, when you're curious and you can ask questions, the other thing you can do is take time to evaluate your bids for connection. Evaluate how are you accepting bids and how are you receiving them? How are you offering to bid with a person and how are you creating bids for connection? Are you making steps to talk to the person? Are you making steps to hear what they have to say? Are you making steps to make them like have this thought like, oh, this person values what I have to say? You also troubleshoot for your relationship. I think when we are willing to step and evaluate what is working in our relationship, it gives us the power to like actually understand the dynamics of our relationship and go from that and say, okay, this is what's working in our relationship. For example, if maybe the feedback was, oh, I don't feel like you're being fully present, we can evaluate like, okay, what is it like how can I troubleshoot? Can I still enjoy my time on social media, but leave my phone in the kitchen before dinner so we can have a dinner like where we're fully focused on each other? Can I troubleshoot for why my partner may think that I'm not listening to what they have to say? Can I troubleshoot for how I'm behaving, how I'm responding to my partner, and maybe decide like, I don't like the way we're talking to each other. I don't like the way we're communicating. Can we fix that? The other thing is that when we are holding space and curious, we can also collaborate more in our relationship. I think when we show up in marriage being a team and willing to collaborate, then feedback becomes a tool to move us forward. Feedback no longer becomes a weapon that we use against each other to direct the flow of who is in charge or who is right and who is wrong. And instead, it becomes this is data that we're collecting so we can collaborate and really be invested in our relationship. The other thing that we're able to do, for example, let's say you get feedback about maybe their love language is like physical touch and they're feeling like you're not making your intimacy and physical connection a priority. Or maybe they're feeling like every time you come home, you're tired and stressed out and they're not feeling like you're connecting. When you are in a space of you want to be curious and in inquiry and empathetic, I think it's the easiest space to communicate about your mental labor, right? We talk about the mental load of motherhood in such passive ways, but I really strongly believe that it's work that needs to continue to be shared and discussed because I don't think we give enough credit to the amount of mental labor that we do as working moms and as moms in general. I always tell the story about when my daughter was little and we used to go to swimming lessons and we had to like literally take her in the pool with us. So one of us had to go in the pool with her, swim, and then once the lesson was finished, get out of the water, get her changed. And first you got to change the cold baby and then change yourself out of your freezing swimsuit. And my husband and I were driving from lunch. And in my mind, I was like, okay, we have to get in the house. And then I have to put her stuff in the bag and I have to do all these things. And my brain is racing. And my husband asked me something about a store that we were driving down the road and he noticed that it had closed. And I was so far out. He was like, are you listening to me? And I go, do you ever like run through these mental lists in your head? Like, what's the kid going to wear? What are they going to eat? Like, blah, blah, blah. And he was like, no, I don't. In that moment, I was like, it's not that I'm superior in the marriage. It's just that like our workload is very different. So when we can, in feedback, when we can show up and have the conversation with our partner, like, oh, this is actually the reason maybe I may not be engaging and connecting is I have all these things that I'm like planning out in my head and like all of this is happening. We can then even ask our partners to help us and support us rather than just like blow up on them and like, I do all the work and da da da. Because I've been there. I've said that. I have like blown up. And like, then my husband's like, what do you need help with? And then I can't even articulate what I need help with because I still want to be in charge and do all the things. And so the conversation about mental labor, like when we talk about it with our partners, I think we also have to have the understanding that it's not out of negligence that they don't know what is going on in our heads, right? It's not out of lack of compassion or empathy or caring. It's just a different set of problems that we have that they are not focused on. And that's not to say that husbands or the other partner doesn't have their own set of mental load, but I truly honestly biased about like we as working moms are like running a million lists in our head. Another example I thought about was recently my daughter was not feeling well, and so she has school in the mornings, and our nanny comes and gets her ready for school because my husband and I are either out of the house early or have to work super early. And she was super, super sick in the middle of the night. It was like midnight. And the next morning, I woke up and the first thought was like, oh my God, I have to let the nanny know to bring a lunch because she won't be like taking my daughter to school today. And my husband calls me and he's like, hey, I let her know to come in a little later. And I was like shocked. I was like, what? You remember, like, you thought about that? And in doing that, I was like, obviously in my head, I'm like, he doesn't even think about that stuff. So he does think about some of the stuff, but it was just surprising to me because I was actually literally drafting a text to my nanny, one, to let her know like, hey, bring a lunch. I mean, I'm biased, but I still think my version of the text was like, hey, you may have to come in. You can come in a little later, but just so you know, like bring a lunch or, plan on like what you're going to do today because there'll be no school versus my husband's like, yeah, just come in at 8:00. So again, I'm a mom, so I'm like thinking about all the things. But when we can discuss the mental labor from a place of curiosity and showing up, without being defensive, I think we can get more productive conversations with our partners in order to create more support for ourselves. The one thing I am very clear on when I coach my clients is even if you say something like, oh yeah, I hear what you have to say. One of the things I always offer is to check your energy while you're saying this. Are you saying it from the energy of defensiveness, right? Are you saying it from the energy of frustration? Or are you saying it from the energy of entitlement? And that's not so that you can go back and like argue with yourself and beat yourself up, but like being really curious about what it is that you want to communicate and why it's important to communicate it from that way. So being clear, like what is the energy I'm showing up with and what do I want the theme of how we communicate in this relationship to be? And is it important for both of us to connect in that way? So I talk about like the 7 principles of making marriage work. And I think that, this is an example of when you can actually use those principles to help each other communicate better, help each other solve for conflict better by embracing these principles. So I'm going to just cover them, just as a refresher. And again, these principles were introduced by the Gottman Institute. They're just tools to help us create deep friendship and mutual respect in our marriages and our relationship. In doing that, it's also like emboldening our emotional intelligence in marriage. If we could do that, we can create better connection and better friendship with our relationship. The first one is sharing love maps, right? This is where we share information about each other and how we store that information. So we gather information about what our partner likes and what they don't like, and then we kind of like have awareness of that. Number 2 is nurturing your fondness and admiration, showing that we care about each other and we focus and really tune into the idea of small things often, where we notice what is working in our marriage, where we notice how our partner is showing up in a positive way in the marriage. Third is turning towards each other instead of turning away. So if you think about the first model where you're feeling that your partner is wrong and you're right, and you have apathy and defensiveness and disinterest and disregard, right? You're not really turning towards them. When you're curious and compassionate, it's not like you're like, I agree with everything you're saying. You just give them the opportunity for you to turn towards them and to understand, like, what is it that you can solve for together as a couple. The fourth one is letting your partner influence you, sharing decision making and willingness to make those decisions and respect each other's decisions. 5 is solving your solvable problems, which realizing that, again, not every problem in marriage has to be solved, right? Like we have perpetual problems, right? And we might not always get to those unless we notice that they're gridlock problems and we can try to solve for those. Number 6 is overcoming gridlock, figuring out like what is causing the blocks in your relationship. And it doesn't mean like fixing them. It just means like noticing the gridlock issues and solving for those. Last but not least is creating shared meaning. So you're both creating rituals and a life that is shared and meaningful to you. You share each other's dreams and goals and aspirations, and you really try to understand like what makes the other person tick and how do you care about each other and how do you connect together for showing up for each other in your marriage. So I know this episode was one of my shortest ones, but I really, really, really wanted to like specifically talk about this because it's something that I notice my clients have a lot of resistance to when they're especially when they've been like working hard to change certain things in their marriage and like they feel like they're improving and bam, here comes their partner like saying, oh, well, there's this one thing you're missing. And they're like, but I'm changing and you're not noticing how I'm changing. And this is the coaching that I usually offer them, obviously at a deeper level. Like we go in and we really explore like, okay, can we see the truth in what the person is saying? One of the things I'm always very clear about is when we notice ourselves getting defensive, there's a part of us that's like, that person has something that I also have noticed in myself. And maybe I'm not willing to question it yet, but the reason I'm defensive is because I'm like, ooh, what if they're right? So when you receive feedback from your partner, I'm not saying just be like, yeah, I agree with you. I agree with everything you're saying. Just being willing to answer the question together, like, how can we solve for these things that we're not agreeing on? And can we do it from a place of curiosity and compassion? So that's all I have for you today. My voice seems to have come back. I'm so excited. Yeah, so if you are struggling with negative feedback from your partner and you want to go deeper in the work, I can totally help you. We can go from being defensive and apathetic and indifferent to really practicing inquiry and compassion in your marriage and yielding results in your relationship that keep moving your relationship forward with positive momentum. So if you are interested, I am still offering one-on-one coaching slots. Go to stethoscopestoswaddles.com/consult. Book your free 1-hour consultation with me. We'll troubleshoot for what's working, what's not working, and we'll get you on the path to the marriage and life that you deserve and desire. So have a great week. I will talk to you next week. Bye. I'm Shira Bergbauer, and you've been listening to the Stethoscopes to Swaddles podcast. New episodes are out every Monday. These episodes are created by me, Shira Bergbauer, and produced by Cassidy Mitchell. If you enjoyed this show or found it helpful, please rate it and review us on Apple Podcasts. If the concepts I share on this podcast resonate with you, or you're ready to change your relationships and mindset, I can help you. If you'd like in-depth, personalized support, I'd love to invite you to apply for my Life and Mindset coaching program. Just imagine you and I every week working together as I teach you the tools to up-level your life. To book your free 1-hour consultation call, go to www.stethoscopestoswaddles.com/consultation. You're doing a great job, Mama. Have a great week. Bye now.